Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for a Black Friday episode. We're going to take a little short break this weekend for the Thanksgiving holiday and spend some time with family and friends. So we're going to reach back into our archives all the way back to episode 43, which is our most popular episode by far, where we talked about ransomware response planning. So I hope you enjoy this replay of ransomware response planning, episode 43. Enjoy your time with family and friends during the holiday season, and we'll see you again next Friday.
We'll ask people, what's your disaster recovery plan? Well, we'll use paper until the computer comes back up. Okie dokie.
That's a plan.
You're listening to the Help Me with HIPAA podcast, where HIPAA and humor collide to make learning fun. Your delightful hosts are Donna Grindle and David Sims. Relax. HIPAA help is on the way.
So I guess now's a good time to welcome all the listeners, since it's the beginning of the podcast. And before we kind of get into everything else, I want to remind everybody to share us out on social media. Go to iTunes and rate us and review us. Those are always very, very welcome. Just kind of think of it as your way of giving us some payback for all the hard work that I put into this.
Well, there we have it. Just started out.
As always, there's somebody's given us something great to talk about. And so this week, we're going to talk about ransomware. But before we get into that, for those who are new, my name is David Sims, and I am with HIPAA for MSPs.com. And joining me is my co-host, Donna Grindle of Cardin Compliance. I guess you can put .com after that as well.
.com. You just like saying it. You sometimes say help me with it, but .com.
.com.
I don't know what your problem is with it, but we'll go with it.
Yeah, well, I don't either.
But you can find us at cardincompliance.com.
.com. So in the news all over the place in recent weeks was this ransomware attack. And for people who aren't quite tech savvy, that might be a very new term to people. And even probably more new than that, and we'll get into it in a little bit, was the fact that they were asking to be paid this ransom in Bitcoins. So we'll have to kind of gloss over a little bit about what that even is for people that are listening if you don't understand or know what Bitcoins are or is. And of course, we won't dive into what that is because it can. We'll probably put links in the show notes, but we could probably spend 5 or 10 minutes even talking about that whole thing of what it is. But we won't go deep into that. But talk a little bit about what happened, Donna. How this came to pass with this hospital out in California. How did they even get ransomware on their computers, and what does that even mean, ransomware?
Well, all the story isn't out yet, really, as at the point we're recording this. It's still pretty new, but Hollywood Presbyterian Hospital was hacked, we'll call it. I don't know, I don't necessarily call it a hack, but they were hit with ransomware that actually shut down the technology of the entire hospital. And that in itself, I can't quite figure out how they were able to do it because, you and I can get into that a little bit more about how was it able to attack that much of the systems and the data, because what ransomware does is it tricks you into clicking a link, and that link, what it does is it runs a little routine that encrypts data somewhere that it can find on your system or on your network and the things you're connected to. And when it encrypts it, then you don't have the encryption key. And we've talked about that in our sessions on encryption about, okay, when you encrypt things, you don't keep the key with it, but you got to keep the key somewhere because without it, you can't access your data. Well, that's exactly what happens is it's encrypted by the bad guys. And then they say, okay, well, we'll give you the key for X amount of dollars, which is why it calls it ransomware. And then Bitcoin is the new, it's the
digital currency.
Yeah, it's the currency of the internet. And, it's more or less regulated across the world on its own. And I remember when it first started and I thought about doing my own Bitcoin mining, and, I just didn't go down that path probably wish I had, but I don't know that I want to be in there because it's where all the darknet scary stuff happens.
Mm-hmm.
But that's how you go and you buy the Bitcoins, and each Bitcoin at this point, I mean, it was getting ridiculously expensive to buy a Bitcoin, but they're, I think, around $450. So they ended up spending $17,000 to get the encryption key and unlock their data and bring their hospital back up.
Mm-hmm.
So that leaves a whole bunch of questions on, at least to me, of number one, how was it able to shut down the whole hospital with one person's ransomware? You know, it's not like a hack, like where they attacked them. It was one of those things where it's just one of those blanket things sent out to trick people into running the ransomware.
Yeah,
And
I mean, it could have been a link on social media they clicked on or something.
Right.
I mean, I don't think they've said exactly how it's happened yet.
No, they haven't mentioned how it got in, or at least I haven't found it yet in any of the news stories or discussions. They did say they knew it wasn't a targeted attack, which tells me it wasn't necessarily done with spear phishing or any of those kind of things that we've talked about before, where they said, we're going to attack this hospital. It was, let me spew this out over the internet and see who falls for it.
Which means it was highly likely that this could have been easily avoided.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't engineered, so to speak. They didn't make a lot of effort to get you. So, but just to know, I mean, this ransomware, this encryption or crypto virus, and they call it all kinds of different things, but essentially this tool, which is, you know, it's been just in the last few years that it's really become a thing. And they estimate millions of dollars have been made by the bad guys encrypting this. And really, once it happens, the only real solution is to restore all your stuff or pay them. That's it.
Yeah. Now, there are some, and I probably even hesitate to say this, but there are some ways that you can break some of the encryption of the old versions of CryptoLocker.
Yeah.
But the chances of you getting hit with an older version is probably slim. But I mean, if this happens to you, and trust me, don't think, oh, this is one of these things that only happens to the big companies. No, I've dealt with this. I know a large number of small IT companies who deal with this every single year, from clients that are small clients, medium-sized clients, large clients. It doesn't matter. Last year, I had a client who was not in medical, thank goodness, but they had a photography firm or company, and they had all of their images on their systems encrypted.
Wow.
It was the same thing. It was the exact same thing. It was a CryptoLocker virus, same thing like this. It was ransomware. They wanted a certain amount of money. It wasn't near as much as this, but they were faced with all the same things. You know, how did it happen? And we'll talk a little bit about, in just a little bit about the backups versus business continuity, and you know, because this particular company I'm talking about, they had backups, but they weren't doing them. They didn't have them set up properly in a way that would have helped them in this situation. And we've touched on this in past podcasts too, about the difference between having file syncing and backups versus business continuity. It's completely different. And people don't understand the difference of that a lot. So we'll get into that in a little bit. But so, you know, the big question they always ask typically is, number one, can you fix it? Which a lot of times is no. And then the second question is, do I pay it? Which, I mean, that comes with a lot of moral and legal issues and everything else you can think of, because you know that if you pay this, then you're funding this activity. And of course, there's a lot of speculation that this funds terrorism and everything else. If you don't pay it, then you may not ever get your data back. So it's almost taking the lesser of the two evils. Can your business survive without that data if you don't have any other way to recover it? So it's definitely something that you should look at now and prepare for now before it happens, because once it happens, it's too late to start trying to prepare for it.
Yeah, so that's why we're calling this ransomware response planning.
Absolutely.
And because it's really, I mean, as far as I know, in these general cases of ransomware, the data never leaves. You know, it's not like they exfiltrate the data from the systems. It's just they run it, and the only thing they're keeping is the key. So you don't really have data that ever leaves your system. The only issue is you can't get to it, only they can. So the question is, how much did they roam around before they encrypted it? And are they roaming around still? And in almost all the cases, it's not that. It's not that kind of an invasion. If it's a targeted one, then yeah, it's a different story. But in most of these cases, it's just random stuff. The program runs and sends them the key, and they're like, hey, we caught somebody. You know, reel it in.
Yeah, let's see what we can get.
You know, somebody grab the hook. We got a good one.
Yeah, and we've had, you know, in the IT community, we've had this happen for, 2 or 3 years. This has been going on with different variants of a CryptoLocker virus. And typically it's like it pops up on the screen and tells you have to pay X amount of dollars. But, and usually it's, $300 or $500 or whatever. There's different ways they ask for it. Sometimes it's, they want a credit card number. Sometimes it's Bitcoins or whatever. But this one is, in reading it, it actually sounds like the amount of money they wanted initially was a lot higher than what it ended up being. So there was apparently some type of discussion with the people. Yeah. So they could negotiate this down to an amount, which was intriguing to say the least.
Well, but it also bears the question to me is, number one, how was it able to encrypt so much? Because how could you have one person that falls for this, or even 10 people that fall for it, and it be able to encrypt and lock down your entire system? Because they were doing no technology functioning. Everything was on paper. Pen and paper all across the board. People literally running things from one department to another. And it was a complete shutdown. So
any one person shouldn't have even had that type of access for a virus to spread like that.
Well, and you think about the amount of data at the hospital. So it had to hit like the main something, and it was the IT department. I know, the IT department fell for it. That's always like the most embarrassing moment, It's like the race car driver that wrecks on the highway. It's like,
this should not happen.
Yeah, it really shouldn't. I was only going 55. But for the most part, you would expect that there's things in place to prevent it. And then the flip side of that is, they said it was just going to be easier to pay them. Well, then that makes me wonder, okay, how much could it really have gotten to that they couldn't restore? And so that, I think, is a good point for us to really talk about.
Was there anything to restore?
Yeah, to really talk about how do you try to mitigate if one of these comes in and manages to get past you? How can you stop it? Because newsflash, it's not a virus. Antivirus software doesn't usually detect it.
No, because it's something you allow to happen.
Right. You say, run this program.
Yeah.
And so it's not like some the malware that's sneaking its way into the program and attaching to programs and pretending to be other programs. It says, hello, I'm ransomware. Will you run me? And you go, yes. You just don't know that's what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, I think before we get into the response planning, it might be a good idea to talk about some avoidance aspects of it. So what can we do to avoid it first? And then if it does happen, maybe how to respond to it. There's different ways to do that. Like we can avoid it by looking at doing things properly and avoiding certain things like clicking on links or whatever. Then there's having things in place like procedures and technology to to give you a better chance, specifically talking about business continuity, to recover from that. And in looking at this story, it's not apparent that there was any type of business continuity set up, or if it was, apparently it was going to be a lot more expensive and time consuming than paying the ransom, which, I'll go on record saying I don't ever recommend anybody pay the ransom, but I know that's a determination and a decision you'll have to make on your own. But I do think that giving somebody money for doing this just makes the problem grow and makes it bigger.
Yeah. But at the same time, you've got a business to run and patients to care for, and it becomes a business decision, not a technical decision. Or, it's the balance of moral and ethical decisions between paying them and...
It's a bad situation.
That's right. You can't win. So, but how can you prevent them? Now, one of the tools, and when this really originally started, there was a guy that came up with this, a few little tweaks that you make to your Windows configuration that could prevent a lot of these from happening. It can't prevent everything. It only prevents it if it's done a certain way, but it just happens to prevent, a lot of them work that way. And it's called Crypto Prevent.
Yeah, and by a Carolina guy too.
It really?
Yeah, he's North Carolina. I think somewhere near the coast, maybe Wilmington or somewhere like that.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. I actually he's in a forum group that I've been in for years. So I actually knew him way before he created this. So
before he was famous.
Before he was famous. He was internet famous. But he's also has some other IT tools. So he's in that niche of creating IT tools. But yeah.
He was a great guy because he gave it away for free, and he still has a free version. But there's then the paid version where they'll give you updates as they find new variants to it. It'll automatically update itself to help prevent those things. But at least get the free version.
Oh, yeah.
And it should go on any Windows computer you have. Any Windows computer, assuming that you don't have unpatched computers. If it's fully patched and you install this, you've got a fighting chance of it never, even if you've run across it not being able to encrypt anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that, like you said, this I think would be the very minimum to do would be to put the free version on, because there again, it's not costing you anything, and it could very well be what saves you.
Right. So step number 1 is go get this free thing and make sure it's on all your Windows computers. Mm-hmm. I know. Yeah, you've actually got to go do it. But, have your IT people do it or whatever, but at least you've got some sort of prevention effort you're making. And that's a very important piece. And
it just runs in the background. It doesn't interrupt you or do anything.
It doesn't even. It just quick runs and it moves some stuff so it's not easy for these programs to do things.
Yeah. So that's one thing you can do, and we'll put links to that in the show notes.
Yes, we will.
Definitely, all my hard work is paying off. For those of you who don't know, Donna does all the hard work.
Yeah, he keeps committing me to stuff in this episode more than normal.
I was like, it'd be great if we do this, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
She's like, yeah, right.
Yeah, I'll get to that as soon as I can, brother. So the first step in your ransomware response planning should be, how much can we mitigate it through installing Crypto Prevent and training people? If you get an email that says, hey, click on this link to buy new snowshoes, don't freaking click it to see where it goes. Just delete it.
And nowadays, I'm trying to figure out how some of my people get these things.
Yeah.
But they'll call sometimes and it'll be a pop-up on the screen, and it's not a link they clicked. It's somehow they did something and got redirected.
Yeah.
And it'll be, it never fails. It'll, call this number, call this 855 number, or call whatever. This is Microsoft, or this is the FBI,
oh my God, I hate
you've been infected. Call this number. And fortunately, people are starting to catch on, at least people who have an IT person they can call on, because I'm having more and more, I'm having people call me beforehand, whereas A year or two ago, people would call me and go, I've been on the phone with this technician from Microsoft for an hour, and he's getting in my system. And I'm like, oh my gosh, unplug the computer, period. Don't even turn it on.
I do enjoy talking to them and telling them I'm doing all the stuff, because, and then, okay, tell me what it says. Oh, yeah, I see what it says. It says, I do IT for a living. You're a liar.
Yeah,
but it's the same. We'll call it the same vit that we have of don't be careless.
And be careful too. Just because an email appears to come from somebody doesn't necessarily mean it is. And matter of fact, what's happening a lot this time of year is larger companies. You'll have an employee somewhere that will get an email that's coming from. It looks like it's coming from the CEO or the finance director, and it'll be asking for information like payroll information or something that you would probably think this time of year with tax season, somebody may actually be asking for that in your organization. They may want to know about Social Security numbers and stuff like that for tax purposes, even though that you shouldn't be doing it over email. But still, there's a lot of times, and I've talked in the past podcast how at my wife's place of employment, a guy sent somebody $500,000 because it was an email that looked like it came from the CEO.
Yeah,
and approving a transfer, and he did it, and it turned out not to be the CEO. But so be careful even with emails that come from people that you think, because it's very easy to spoof an email. It's so super easy. Anybody can do it. You don't have to have any tools to do it with.
Yeah, we have clients that send us examples of it all the time, and they think, the CEO's email's actually gotten hacked this time because it looks like it's really from him. And then you have to study it really close because there's like an extra N in the name. It's spelled with 2 N's instead of 1. But that's how they go about doing it, is to make it look so good. Even an employee who is used to looking for phishing and who is very good at looking for phishing can be stumped by it. They know it's phishing, but they think that this one has actually been into the CEO's email, and they don't even realize it. So they're that good. And
or here's one for you that I used to see a lot. I hadn't seen it lately, but I'll get an email and it'll say, it'll have all the markings and logos and everything of Facebook, and it'll say, so-and-so has mentioned you in Facebook. Click here to read it. And you're going to go, okay, what's they're saying about me? And then you click on it if you're not careful.
And then you go to an infected website, which takes me to another point of your ransomware response planning, is if you have a business website, make sure someone is actually worrying about the security on it. Because I don't know how often you run into this, but we see it all the time where people that are the marketing and the graphics and all of that, they learn the tools to build websites that are beautiful, but not secure. And no one's going out and patching the websites. And I don't know whether you're using Drupal or Joomla or WordPress or whatever. It needs to be up to date. Your servers need to be maintained and your security needs to be up to date, because you could be the source of ransomware. You don't even have to do anything. You would know nothing and go to your own website and infect yourself.
Yeah.
It's sad, but it's true. I mean, I know they have been pounding one of my websites trying to get in recently. And it's just terrifying for me to see what they're doing, trying to get in and constantly going, have I done this? Have I done that? How are they going to find it? But it's there and it's happening. And so many of these people who are web developers have no idea about security. All they know how to do is use the tool to build the web page. So you need to ask those people in charge of your website, ask them, who's handling the security and the patches and making sure it's okay. And there are companies like WordFence and Securi and a variety of others that will monitor those things for you. It's worth the money.
Oh, yeah.
Because, we've had clients say, we're infected. What is it? Well, it's our website. when you search for what should be showing up as us, you get like drug sales. And I say, okay, first of all, your website is not even in your network. So your network seems fine. However, let's talk about your web developer. Who handles that? I don't know. Some guy wrote it a couple of years ago.
It hadn't been updated since.
Yeah. So it's important that you worry about these things. So one of the things you want to make sure you do is that you make sure your business website is not spreading the crap. And you want to load the crypto prevent. And you want to educate people on don't click any link. If you don't know who's sending you stuff or where it's going to, and you get unsolicited stuff all the time, but that doesn't mean you go over and go to the website manually. I know you got to type it in, but that's what I do.
And even though this is not we talked about it not being a virus, you still absolutely need antivirus on every one of your endpoints, mobile devices, anything that's connecting to your network, as well as having antivirus on what we call the edge of the network, which means as soon as the traffic's coming into your building, you should have what's called a unified threat management device or something similar that's also doing a lot of intrusion prevention and scanning for viruses and all that. It's a multi-layer approach. The same way in which you have multi-layers of protection to protect your home, because you have locks on your doors, or you may have the chain on your door as well. You may have an alarm system on your door or lighting outside. You have all these different levels of security. It's the same way in your network. You have to have multiple layers of security to keep people out.
Yes. It's not just, you put one little padlock on and you're done.
Yeah. I mean, most people, I won't say most people, but I have had people, even with big businesses, I walk in there and they're running some free version of an antivirus, and that's it. That's all they have. if they even have that. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me.
Yeah.
Some things you can get away with for free, but trust me, when it comes to antivirus, you need to have the best you can possibly get. I mean, it's not like we're talking a major expense here. But another great thing about having a managed service provider IT company is that they monitor that. So they're looking at the logs and they're getting the alerts. And if something happens, then they can address it a whole lot faster than you have an employee that got some alert and they were busy, so they ignored it. And then a month went by before you found out that you actually had an affected system.
Well, you want to make sure you ask your IT providers if that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
Because, they sell you stuff. You can't just assume that you decided to buy the low end and you're getting that level of protection. It could be, well, we've put these things out here so we can go research it if there's a problem, but that doesn't mean we're proactively monitoring it.
That's true. That's very true.
And that's what you want to look for. So, but then the other piece is, let's get into the backup, disaster recovery, business continuity, because I'm pretty sure this is a big soapbox thing for you. So,
yeah.
I know you do.
It is. And the reason it is because there's so much misinformation and misunderstanding about what it even is, because there's so many options nowadays to move your data from point A to point B that people don't understand what a backup even is anymore. And there's a huge difference between having a backup and having a backup plan and having a business continuity. So let's look at these, I guess, in the really basic sense. Backing up your data really is just a process of making another copy of it. The problem is that typically a backup, a basic backup, is making a copy of that data every, let's just say, day or week, whenever you decide to do it. It's making a copy of that data and it's overriding the data that you backed up the day before. So, Monday's data gets backed up, and then when Tuesday rolls around, then Tuesday's data is backing up over top of Monday's, and it just keeps going and keeps going. The problem with this, and the reason why I don't consider this I guess it's a backup, but I don't consider it a backup for a business, because I think businesses should be on a business continuity plan. We'll talk about that in a second. But when you're doing it that way, if the data gets encrypted on Monday, and for some reason you don't catch it, which typically you're not, you don't catch it before the backup, kicks off, and guess what? It's going to back up the encrypted files and overwrite the good files that you had, and now your backups are encrypted, which is
that's why you have a backup history.
Yes, which is exactly what happened to the photography client I was telling you about a couple of years ago. They had a backup, but the way they were using it, it was overwriting the day before every single time. And so when they come to me, they're like, oh, we're not worried about it. We have a backup. And I'm like, it infected your backup. It infected your backup too. So there's nothing you're going to be able to do about that at all. So, but having a history like we were just talking about, we call that versioning. So you have multiple versions of that backup. And this is when you start moving from backups to business continuity, because it is what it says. It's disaster recovery. If you can't recover from a disaster, then you don't have a disaster recovery going on. If your business can't continue, then you don't have a business continuity plan.
That's right. If your only option is to pay the guy.
Yeah. So think about that. When you're paying for these, I don't know, if you're paying, $20, $30, $50, $60 a year for backup, you probably are not getting these options to be able to use. You're probably not getting a backup. You're getting more of something similar to a file sync. It's going to be up to you to do your own investigation to find out what you're getting and what it does. But if you're doing file syncing, I had one client told me one time, he's like, oh man, I love my backup because as soon as the file changes, man, it backs it up immediately. That's so awesome. And I'm like, no, that's not awesome at all.
Yeah, no. Yeah, because that means whatever screwed up, you got that.
Yeah, as soon as you have a problem, it's made a copy of your problem. No,
well, that's
right. Not good.
We use, when we've talked about it before, we both are Google Apps companies, and it's interesting that we were Google Apps companies before we even met each other. It wasn't something we did to each other. Of all of the things we've done to each other, it's not one of them. But I don't know what yours policy is, but we have people say, well, I back it up on my Google Drive, which is the same concept as the OneDrive with Microsoft. It's the same concept. It's essentially the same. Dropbox and Box.net and all of those others. It is file syncing. So everybody's like, well, if you already have everything in the cloud, then you're good to go. And I said, no. I have a service that sits on top of my Google Apps and does a nightly backup that keeps versions of it. So I'm able to then restore a version from a backup, even if I get my data encrypted. If one of my team members gets ransomware that somehow encrypts our data that's in Google Drive, I've still got it on backup.
Yep.
So the good news is I have backup and I actually have the ability to respond. But the bad news is most people don't get it. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. And it is confusing. It's, it's almost everything now in IT has got confusing. It's like, used to years ago when you went out to buy a computer, it was pretty much, okay, do you want an AMD or do you want an Intel? And people understood that there was a difference there, but there wasn't many differences beyond that. If you went Intel, you had to say, okay, I want a Celeron or I want a Pentium. That was it. Nowadays, it just runs the gamut. I mean, there are just tons of different options, so much so that even just buying a computer is complicated. An i5 processor this year is not the same as the i5 processor from last year or the year before or the year before. So now you got to get into which family of processor it is. And it's the same way with a lot of the things that we're talking about with the backups, is that it's gotten so complicated that you almost have to either do a lot of research or have somebody that can guide you through that process, making sure that you go toward the disaster recovery type solutions and you go for the business continuity type solutions, which they're one and the same, and not eke your way out on the free or low cost backup syncing options.
Don't just go for the cheapest and don't just assume, well, I've done this layer. It's just like anything else. There has to be layers. And to think, and I think one of the biggest issues that we run into is that people still want the technology to be cheap or free.
Yeah.
Because I can get a computer now, because I remember back in the day, I don't know about you, my first computer that
$3,000.
yeah, it was $2,500 for the first, really brand new, and it wasn't one where I pieced together leftovers from work. And my first one was a dual floppy. My second one actually had a hard drive that was like 20 meg hard drive, and then the real nice first one I bought, $2,500.
Yeah, probably an IBM PS1.
No, I couldn't afford one of those. I think it was an Acer, and I bought it on a payment plan, and by the time it was paid off, it was still relevant. It wasn't necessarily no longer valid equipment. But today, if you were to pay something and buy a new computer, you can get a fairly usable machine with much more power than our $2,500 computer, for $500.
Oh yeah.
Less than
Easily.
that, $300.
Easily. Yep.
So when you look at the fact that people have now see this is almost disposable. Until, of course, okay, well, all of these, you haven't bought new equipment in 3 years, everything needs to be replaced. Oh, well, I don't want to spend that much money. But this stuff this is the backbone of your business. And you can either choose to not use technology to run your business, which is going to put you behind, or you can choose to budget for these things and do them the right way, or you're going to end up in the middle and you're going to end up paying $17,000 to some dark net person you'll never know who it is and be all in the news because you don't have any way of putting yourself back online.
Right. And I think, I don't have the statistic in front of me, but it's something like 80% of businesses who lose data will go bankrupt within 12 months.
Yeah.
You just, it's that important. And so you want to make sure that you get into knowing what disaster recovery and business continuity is. And so while you're developing your plan, and this amazes me here, what I'm about to say, people test their backups, but they don't test their recovery. And so they don't know if they can even recover until they need it. And I have had multiple occasions when the recovery process failed.
Yeah.
And they had no idea because they never tested it. And fortunately, it wasn't something I put in place, but you can't wait until you need it to see if it works. And you can't assume that, I'm paying some, big name company that does this for thousands of people. I pay them money, so it's going to work.
Oh,
no.
Yeah.
No. I mean, you take anybody, well, I don't say anybody, but let's just use Carbonite, because I know for a fact Carbonite's a big company. Carbonite's been around a long time. People know the name Carbonite, but they have had cases where they have had system failures to where data has been lost. And so backups were lost. You can't assume that because you're paying a backup company that they're going to save your data, and that's all you need to do. I mean, there should be on-site backups. There should be off-site backups. When you're building your business continuity or your disaster recovery plan, you need to look at two specific things, and one is what's called the recovery time objective, which means at what point do you need to recover to? So is it that you need to recover, you can't do more than an hour's worth of lost productivity? Do you need to have that type of backup so that it's backing up every single hour? Or can you go a few days? So if you lost a few days worth of work, it wouldn't be that devastating. Where does that recovery time point need to be at? And then the other thing that you need to look at is how often that needs to happen. So those are a couple things to look at too in your recovery. This time of year, if you're an accounting firm, you want to back up probably pretty doggone frequently in the beginning part of the year when the taxes kick off, because you're having so much data change and so much data coming into your network and your systems. But after April 15th, that tends to drop off a lot, and then you may not need to back up but once a week or once every 2 weeks because you don't have near as much data flow coming in. So all those things have to be in your plan, and all that comes through doing assessments like we always talk about doing.
Well, yeah, it's identify where is your stuff and how am I making sure it's protected, as well as can I get to it. And we'll ask people, what's your disaster recovery plan? Well, we'll use paper until the computer comes back up. Okie dokie.
It's a plan.
So now we can say, let's review the situation at Hollywood Presbyterian, and let's see how you would handle it in your own environment. So think about that when you're trying to build your ransomware response plan, because it's different than a breach response. Mm-hmm. It's a different animal. And it's not like the normal what everybody thinks of in disasters. Ransomware should be listed on your risk analysis threat list. So how am I going to try to do that? Well, I'm going to do my best to control it, because I can't assume it's not going to happen, and I can't necessarily transfer it to a third party. I'm going to have to control it, and it doesn't matter who you are.
Yep.
So, and Hollywood Presbyterian kept saying patient care wasn't affected, but...
I saw that, and I'm like, really?
I don't know how it didn't affect things in some way. And no, patient care wasn't affected, but we did send a ton of our patients to other hospitals.
Yeah, that could have been something that happened.
No, I read that they did.
Oh, it did happen.
Sent
Okay.
several patients to other hospitals. So, and hospitals tend to have those kind of plans, but what are you going to do in your business? That's what I'm asking you.
What you going to do?
Think about it. Think about it today. What are you going to do?
Develop your plan, put your plan in action, and above all, test your plan. Test the backups, test the recovery, do a structured walkthrough. Make sure you have team members in place and who needs to be responsible for what. I mean, all this should sound familiar to you if you've been listening to this podcast at all. Do a disaster simulation. Everybody thinks about, let's do a fire drill or let's do a breach response plan and drill and all that. All those things are absolutely necessary. But don't forget, you should also do a data disaster simulation and testing and making sure all that works.
I mean, I remember those days back in college, and you finally managed to get yourself into bed and asleep, and then the fire alarm goes off. It's a fire drill, and everybody's standing outside, half asleep, trying to figure out, is this real or a drill? And I'm not saying that necessarily I was studying to stay up late. But
you probably pulled a fire alarm.
No, never that. So, but it's the same concept. You've got to test it. If you don't test it and make sure everybody knows what to do and that it works, because I've had it happen before, just like you, that people don't realize that, after that update, it no longer was doing the backup of X, Y, and Z. But nobody looked and nobody tried to restore anything.
Mm-hmm. If you don't test it, somebody else might.
I know, really.
It's much better to be able to test it on your terms and test it on someone else's.
That's right. It's like what we were originally going to talk about this episode being encryption. Do it your way or do it their way.
Yeah. For all that we talk about doing encryption, it's bad that you let somebody else do your encryption for you and then they ask you for some massive payoff.
Yeah. It's not the way you want to do encryption.
Nope. So that was awesome. Great episode.
Well,
so
I'm glad you think so.
I think so. I think I did an awesome job. So anyway, if you want to find us on the web, you can go to www.helpmewithhipaa.com. If you have a question, you can leave it right there on our front page, and we may feature that in a future podcast. Don't forget to go to iTunes and give us a rating. And also, don't forget that we have released our own training courses on our website. So go check those out. The courses are for covered entities and business associates, and they are amazing. So go check those out. And for your organization, I'm sure you'll love them. So for Donna and myself, remember that HIPAA is not about compliance. it is about patient care.
You've been listening to the Help Me with HIPAA podcast, hosted by Donna Grindle and David Sims. The show created to help you with HIPAA. For more information or to ask us a question, visit our website at helpmewithhipaa.com. Neither Donna Grindle or David Sims are attorneys, and they do not offer binding legal advice concerning regulatory compliance. The information in this podcast should not be relied upon or construed as legal advice in any way. Consult your attorney for legal advice concerning compliance with HIPAA regulations.